All right, welcome back from the break, and we're starting the second and last session of SWIP today. The title of this session is Continued Progress. I'm Osma, and I will be moderating the session supported by Uldis.
Hello, everyone.
Yeah, I think the common topic of these three talks we are having in this session is that all of them involve existing systems that have been developed over some time. And yes, without further ado, I will introduce the first talk. So the first talk is called New, Newer, Newest, Incrementally Integrating Linked Data into Library Catalog Discovery. And there will be three speakers: Huda from Cornell University, Stephen Folsom, also from Cornell, and Astrid Usong from Stanford University. So please, the stream is yours.
Hello, everyone, and thank you. We've also put the link to the slides in the Mattermost Town Square, and you can also get them from the page here. I will do a quick apology. I've been having a very bad cough, so if I am not able to continue, one of my wonderful co-presenters will take over, but hopefully it won't come to that. So our talk is about trying to, the work we've done to explore how to use linked data to provide a better discovery experience for library catalog users. So as Osma was saying, that's the existing system we're interested in, the library catalog. We're going to be covering a lot of ground, which is why it's probably useful to have that link to the slides. The slides have references at the end and also additional slides in case people have questions. We're going to go through some background and motivation. There's three different phases that we'll touch on, and then we'll end with a summary of implementation, data, and usability work across those phases that we've done, and lessons learned and some future directions. So that's a lot going on. We have a lot of Back to the Future references. In a way, you can think of this work as us really thinking about the future of library catalogs, what Brave New World may exist, but doing it in a way where we are cognizant of the library catalog as it exists right now, the systems that support it, and how we can begin these explorations with the current state of affairs. So let's go through background motivation very quickly. The work that we are reporting on is all part of the Linked Data for Production Closing the Loop grant. It's the work that we're going to talk about specifically focuses on the discovery area, and it is a mixture of both experimentation and work that's actually in production. And we've tried to clarify which aspects are in production and which are experimental. And we're really interested in trying to understand how to support more open-ended discovery and meet users where they are. And we'll be talking about that throughout the talk. So like I said, there's multiple phases of work. We're going to be talking about each of these three phases very quickly. Again, we don't have time to go into detail, so please ask questions, and we'll provide documentation. And again, there are references at the end. And throughout our work, we've tried to incorporate some aspect of either usability testing or user research, and we'll talk about that in a minute. With respect to how we've done the implementation of the phases that we'll be talking about, all of these are really relying on client-side display, so trying to understand how we can decorate, supplement, extend the designs that we have right now in the library catalog, the options we've already picked, and how users currently navigate the catalog. So we try to use that as a starting point to see what else we can provide to the users using linked data. And we're always on the lookout for shared identifiers and URIs. They're really the glue that and the bridge that allows this work to actually happen. I'm going to make a terrible Back to the Future analogy. It's that whole electric wire thing that lets the DeLorean work. It's been a while since I've seen the movie. I'm going to hand it off to Astrid now to talk about our overall usability and user feedback approach.
Thanks, Huda. So whenever we prototype one of these features, we always want to test it with users, because otherwise, it's like, what's the point of doing this? So we first, for all the usability tests we do, we try to decide on what the objective is. Like, what are we trying to test the usability, or whether this feature is actually, any help, or what is the objective? And then we recruit a target audience. So this has been a mix of Stanford and Cornell users. And then, sometimes like Huda will, lurk in the library itself and pounce upon unknowing victims and ask them to test things, or we'll recruit, via email. We have kind of like a list of people that we can reach out to and, do a Zoom call with, a one-on-one. And then what we usually do is sometimes it's just Huda, sometimes it's both of us. One will ask questions, one will take notes, and we'll observe the person doing a series of tasks. We'll ask them to think aloud. Okay, as you're going through this, what are you thinking? Are you confused about anything? Is anything helpful? And then at the end of the test, we'll debrief, and then I'll identify key takeaways, and then like also hopefully start to see some patterns, like, oh, we notice the user always going to this section, or gravitating towards this. And then of course, with any good design, it's never really done. So then we iterate and test again, and that's our basic methodology.
Thanks. And for the phases, there's documentation that goes through the specific user tests and results. We won't have time to go through all of that, but feel free to ask us questions. We're including this slide because this is something that people often ask us about, or have asked us about in the past. What is our system that we're extending? So a lot of the work that we've done, especially for this presentation, all of the work is focused on the Cornell Library Catalog. We have a copy of the code and a copy of the backend indices that we can run experiments with. And then for production, this is the system that we've integrated into. So our front end is Blacklight. We have separate indices for authors and subjects and bibliographic info, and it's running off of our Folio ILS. And again, this is a very partial overview, but it should give you an idea of the system that we're extending. Because one of the comments on our abstract was about reconciliation work and how we bring in information, it's important to note that what we're really doing is using the existing headings and the information and the indices we have, and then trying to find pathways to link data and other sources. So now we're going to use the hoverboard to very quickly and hopefully you won't look like Marty McFly in this picture, go through these phases. And again, this is very quick, so it's just to give you a taste of the work we've done, and then we'll end with a sort of summary overview. So the one we wanted to start with our discovery across subject headings, and it's important to note that this work is in production. So it is in our library catalog. This is a real-time view of the Cornell Library Catalog in production. This is literally what it looks like. I'm kidding, of course, that's not. So the objective behind this work was to understand, is there a way we can bring in contextual information around authors and subjects? And how can we do that in a way that lets users find resources, but also links them back to how the catalog works right now? So again, very quickly, this is sort of, this is back to the past. This is what the catalog looked like circa November 2021. We're looking at an item, Middlemarch, and we're looking at a little info button. And you can see some of the information that's being brought in. This is our updated version, which is now in production, where we're bringing in information from Wikidata, like the image and the short description. And we've also updated some of the design, which was actually a result of some user testing we did as part of the grant. That knowledge panel, this is the view where it used to go. So this is again in the past, where this was the author browse page that clicking that link for viewing full information would take you to. And this is the information that's in the author index in the catalog. So we redesigned that and are now bringing in information, again, the image from Wikidata. You can see citizenship and educated at have little asterisks next to them. That's also from Wikidata, a description from DBpedia. And we also use the Library of Congress URI that we're retrieving as part of this page to get the classification that allows us to then go to this browse by call number feature. And very quickly, we did something very similar for the subject browse page. This is what it used to look like. Now we're bringing in Wikidata info, DBpedia info, and linking back to the call number browse using the magic of having that classification info from id.loc.gov. And there are links here if you want to actually go and check it out in the Cornell Library Catalog in production. You can do that now. So I'm going to hand it off to Stephen. He's going to quickly talk about our next experimental phase.
Right. So bibliographic access newly GUI'd. It's a forced acronym, but in this phase, we've focused on bibliographic data rather than authorities that in the phase that Huda just described. And here we wanted to consider work-to-work and work-to-instance types of use cases. And we were able, I want to be clear, we were able to build a prototype that tested well with users, but a lot of the features you'll see here, we would require more and better data in order to launch into production. You skipped a bunch. Okay, so Bang motivations. Yeah, our hypothesis here is that works and instance distinctions could be more useful for clustering for different forms of a given work, and that work constellations could provide more context for library resources. One thing to point out here is that we already have other forms of this work feature that is driven by OCLC work clusters. So we already have a sense of what clustering can do for the user. And we began to evaluating other BIBFRAME data sources to see if we could find consistent and meaningful relationships. The sources we looked at were the Library of Congress, id.loc.gov hubs, and the ShareVDE program for cooperative cataloging data. And again, we were focusing on top-level aggregations and hoping to find different items in our catalog that could be brought together in sort of any sort of browsing feature. And what we found was, so obviously there have been lots of presentations on the similarities and differences between LC and ShareVDE's BIBFRAME implementations. Generally, what we concluded is for our clustering use cases in discovery, they look relatively similar. The hub and the opus both can sometimes point to various publications of a given work. And then more broadly, our data analysis showed that there are some useful clustering of items in the catalog, but in rare occasion, is it the complete cluster? There are some relationships between works, but the work-to-work relationships that lead to instances in our catalog were limited not only in number, but in variety too. And also it's important to point out that the work clusters that we have from OCLC show that there's room for improvement in the BibFrame clustering algorithms, but also that we found BibFrame clusterings that were more successful in some cases than the OCLC work clusters. So even without large swaths of rich work-to-work data, we wanted to demonstrate what could be possible in a discovery setting if we had those rich descriptions. To do this, we worked out a strategy that would bring work-level information from Sinopia, Stanford's linked data editor, to create a proof of concept. So here is just a prototype that is data-driven, but we had to create that data. And here we see a catalog page for the publication of Dune. There's other copies, so different versions of Dune. We see sequels, and then down at the bottom, you can barely see this, but there's a button there for exploring adaptation, translations, and more. And what that sends you to is a work-like page that brings together information from DBpedia, work-level information from our bib record, and then a bunch of translation sequels, adaptation works about that we were, again, driven by Sinopia data.
So I'm very quickly going to talk about the phase we're in right now, which is also experimental. So this is about music. So of course, this slide is very appropriate. And perhaps this work is just as exciting as that rendition. So what we're looking at right now is trying to understand, we already looked at works. Can we look at musical works specifically? And the motivation for that was work that's being done by the Music Library Association, our colleagues Tracy Snyder at Cornell and Kevin Kishimoto at Stanford, and others are working on a project to bring in information about musical works into Wikidata. This is information that may not necessarily either be captured by MARC or isn't parsable at the same level. And so they're trying to enrich Wikidata statements and bring that information in. And we want to see if we could use some of that information and bring it into the library catalog. And some of these statements are specific to music, like tonality and instrumentation, but some of them are possibly more generally applicable, like dedications. So it might be useful in general. Here's an early prototype that shows one way of perhaps bringing in information into the catalog, where you're seeing everything in this box is information coming in from Wikidata. This includes the K catalog numbers. These are thematic, I think, catalogs that are important to music researchers. And this information is found, but more in sort of textual format, sort of distributed across the record, not necessarily in a discrete way where you can pull it out the way we've done because of Wikidata. And it also brings back information like tonality and instrumentation. So this is supplementary information that might be useful to musical people interested in music. And our next steps in this area are to understand, we're going to do some user testing. So we want to understand which relationships and properties might be of use to people interested in music who are using the library catalog, and what other design options we might be able to use. So that is forthcoming. So this is the very quick implementation data and usability overview. This is the audience peering into the slides. Hopefully not, because there's less wind where you are. And so I'm going to hand it off to Astrid, who's just going to give a quick overview of our user testing.
Yeah, so all of our user testing details are on our wiki site. If you want to go there and look at the summaries and the scripts that we use. But overall, these features have been really helpful. And again, we're not looking to replace Google or be Google. We're just looking to make the experience a lot better than what it is and make it a little bit stickier, so people stick around on in our catalog and find useful features rather than having to toggle back and forth between a Google or Wikipedia and our site.
And so a quick overview of the implementation details. So I think it's important to note that, again, we're mostly working for a lot of these phases from the string headings that are already available in the catalog, then trying to look up URIs and then making those URIs our method of being able to retrieve related information. In the case of the work we did with Bang, we're actually using the URI in MARC, and I'll talk about that in a quick second. Actually a little bit about each of these. So let's just go here real quick. This shows us the client-side requests that are being done in production right now. Again, you're starting from a heading, and then you're going to get the URI from the Library of Congress, and you use that to get Wikidata info, use that to get classification info, etc. And there will be a similar workflow for the musical works we're looking at, where we're going to use the heading, the author title heading, to then get us a URI that can then provide us inroads into the other linked data sources. For production, it was also important for us to see how we could disallow pieces of information for ethical reasons and for inaccuracies that might exist. So we wanted a way to allow the system to say, don't show anything, for instance, on the left in this configuration for this author that's coming from Wikidata or DBpedia, and on the right you can see examples where we're using this YAML file configuration to say, don't show these specific properties. And again, there's more documentation that you can look at for that. As Stephen mentioned, for the bibliographic works phase, we're using Sinopia to model information about works and instances, and we're using identifiers like OCLC, ISBN, and LCCN as our main connection points between the works and instances that we've modeled in Sinopia and the library catalog items. And as far as if you're looking at it and you're in the catalog, how do you know which work you're related to? We use the work URIs from Sinopia and put them in the mark itself, and then have the page go out using the Sinopia API, query the information, and bring back those work-to-work relationships so we can then populate that prototype. I'm going to hand it off to Stephen now.
Right. So wrapping up, so a lot of the linked data features that you've seen here are nice to have, and we call them decorations. We're still relying on the MARC BIB and the authority record. So what this means on the surface of things is that we can be less concerned about completeness in the linked data that we're incorporating. That said, we still need to consider what it means to have features come and go depending on the ability for us to make outside connections and the strengths and weaknesses of that data, including who's represented well and who's left out of those data sets. Testing and discussions have suggested that we might want to not only display external data, but begin to index it to support search functionality. This would require caching infrastructure that we don't currently have. And of course, with a complex metadata ecosystem, for information literacy reasons and data maintenance, we need to understand the data provenance. For the data models themselves, it's important to point out that we're still working through how best to show the user work level information. We tend to come from a publication level, and based on studies and how we've experienced other systems, we can feel pretty confident that we don't want to force a complete separation of entities that often they don't make sense on their own. They require some sort of flattening of the data model for the user. And then lastly, how might this change cataloging practices? Ideally, the cataloger will no longer have to think about unique strings, and we can focus more on descriptive relationships between the entities to support some of these new use cases, and that's going to require data quality in data points that we haven't traditionally tried to maintain. We also are going to have to engage in strategic relationships with these quote-unquote external data producers, understanding that we could help in minimizing the harm and strategically prioritize different areas for active improvement. And lastly, in sort of landing where we started, we're building off from an existing platform in this sort of moment of transition. And at least at Cornell, we feel that we don't have to fully transition away from MARC to benefit from linked data and discovery.
I think we'll just leave that there. And we're out of time. So here is our final slide with our documentation links. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for your excellent presentation, and I love the references to the future. So we have a few comments and questions from the audience. First of all, just some comments from Ruth, that this is one of the things Cornell has done that I really like, and that I love that some of the stuff, like the works by and works about links, are stuff we always could do, but there's such a nicer page and more straightforward experience. So that was just praise coming in from the audience. But then some questions from Peter. First question is, do you have a reference for the BIBFRAME clustering algorithm that was used here? And well, second question related to that, are genre variations, like adaptations, part of the work cluster, or are they work-to-work relations? So
Stephen might have some input on this, but I think the first question has to do with the data analysis. So there are slides at the end, and there is a report, which I'll put a URL in the town square later. If we're talking about the Opus and Hub clustering and how we tried to look at that and analyze that, then we can put the reference in for that. For the second question, if we're talking about the data analysis, we weren't really looking at adaptations. I don't think. I think we were looking at anything that fell under a Hub or fell under an Opus, and I don't think. I mean, under Hubs, translations are a separate hub, so they wouldn't fall under the same hub. We did look at hub-to-hub relationships as well as part of the analysis. As far as the prototype for what we modeled in Sinopia, I don't know if this is a question, but we did look at adaptations, translations, and made those work-to-work relationships. I don't know if, Stephen, you have more to say about that.
Yeah, in the interest of time, we sort of glossed over some of the challenges we faced in understanding the different BIBFRAME flavors. Essentially, where we fell was let's stay out of any sort of try not to be too opinionated, and if somebody has some data that's useful, we use it. In this case, we didn't find really rich information about adaptations, sequels, etc. So we produced that, and we did a lightweight approach to that. We took existing forms that are in Sinopia to catalog monographs and just produce data that we knew that could do that. So I think there's 1,000 ways to model these things, and if the data is useful enough where we can get from a publication up to something that's a work-like thing that relates to other work-like things, and then back to publications, because really that's what it's about for us, is getting people back to the resources in our catalog. We're not about a pure model that in the abstract. We really want to improve discovery and circulation of our collections.
Okay, thank you. One final quick question. You showed those exclude files that sort of prevented some data from being displayed. So what's the process for updating those excludes? How many exceptions do you anticipate ending up with?
So right now, that YAML file is part of the Blacklight app itself, so it's part of the code. So that needs to be updated. Someone would have to update the code. I think Stephen has mentioned this in discussions earlier, where who owns that and who can access that. Those are still questions that are open for discussion. And we haven't ended up with too many exceptions. We have a few. You could probably even see them if you went to our GitHub. But we haven't had too many yet. We do have a few. There are a couple of examples where there were two people that were, for whatever reason, coming up with the same URI when that was not true. I don't know, Stephen, if you have anything else to add.
It was important for us to have agency over that as a cataloging department, and I think that's the role of a technical services unit, but I haven't been following it recently. I do know that we have like a feedback mechanism in our catalog, so that if something like this shows up, we have a way to act on. If it shows up in the feedback, we can act on that and make sure that we're doing less harm in the catalog.
Okay, thank you very much. All right, it's time to move on to the next talk. So thank you very much. And the next